Hey, I'm gonna put my headphones on. Yeah, you didn't know I wasn't really napping. I actually was reading. Welcome, appreciate you. There is a big change happening in culture related to young men leaving churches like the North American Anglican Church, which is far more conservative than the European flavor of that, which is completely lost. People leaving, of course, the Methodist Church, half of which has gone completely anti-biblical. Even leaving decent, fairly biblically strict Lutheran churches. And they're leaving to go to Orthodox Christianity. And this is where the pastors or priests wear robes, where there is a homily. It feels much more Catholic. It's not, but it feels much more Catholic. The services feature different pastors all the time. There's not a focus on one pastor. This is being explained as young men seeking a masculine church. Okay, but I don't think that's it. I think it's far more clear what it is. And if it's written about by the secular press, of course they need to make it something like it's more masculine. We'll talk about that. We do need to talk about what's going on with Ethan Haine, the whistleblowing surgeon out of Texas, because Joe Biden's so-called Department of Justice is making their third attempt to put him in prison for whistleblowing on his hospital, who behind the scenes was still carrying out surgeries and hormonal, treatments. They're not treatments on kids. We'll talk about this with the help of our free speech platform, the ToddHermanShow.substack.com, and with God Almighty.
The Todd Herman Show is 100% disapproved by big pharma, technocrats, and tyrants everywhere. No. From the high mountains of free America, here's the Emerald City exile, Todd Herman.
Today is the day the Lord has made, and these are the times to which God has decided we shall live. So Ethan Haine, you know him. He's the surgeon who blew the whistle on his hospital in Texas that was continuing to carry out these wrong-sex hormones and wrong-sex surgeries. They said that they weren't going to do this, and they did it, and he caught them. And without sharing the name of any patients or any families, he gave that information to Christopher Rufo, the journalist originally, I don't know originally, but worked out of Seattle for a long time. Now, of course, very famous. President Trump has brought him in to help clear out DEI, et cetera, from the military and other federal institutions. So the Department of Justice went in front of the judge in this case, and they had a very serious issue to bring up with this judge. It happens that Ethan Haine was on Twitter sharing his opinion of the DOJ. He said some mean things. He said they were incompetent. Well, they had filed a brief that contained material and important spelling errors. Whoops. They had a prosecutor attached to the case who knew she had a conflict. Her family's company has major business dealings with this hospital. They have helped raise funds for this hospital. And yet she decided to try to destroy Ethan Haine, no doubt on behalf of this hospital. As laundered through the Department of Justice, she has since stepped off the case. Ethan Haine meanly pointed this out. Mean tweets. He also had the temerity, the audacity, the daring to write on Twitter the fact that the Department of Justice had in one of their grand jury, they're going on 3 attempts to destroy this man. One of the grand jury presentations contained a lie. So the Department of Justice, so-called, came back and said, oh, well, we didn't know it was a lie. That was their excuse. Because he's been pointing these things out, the Department of Justice says this is very, very dangerous. And it's very disturbing and it's very hurtful to the career public servants who work at the DOJ. They shouldn't have criticism, because if they get criticized, people will kill them or something. So they went in front of the judge, and the judge looked at their gag order. They wanted Ethan Haine banned from certain behaviors, certain forms of communication. They weren't all that clear on what they were, but they just gave some examples and future such things. Because you can't have an American citizen criticizing his government when he's on trial by that government. That's very dangerous. The judge did not agree to impose the gag order, which would appear to be good news, right? Except he left it open. He didn't deny it. He didn't approve it. It's hanging like the proverbial sword, the Damoclean sword, over the head of Ethan Haine. So anytime they want to, or the judge chooses, he can say, yeah, you remember that gag order? He also said to Ethan Haine, we're going to be watching you. Make sure that you don't step afoul of these guidelines. Which guidelines? Well, you know. His wife is a mother and a lawyer, and she had a response to this, and I love this response. I'll share this with you in just a second. I was getting out of the truck this morning. I was walking in here to come into the studio. This is a morning where I get in pretty rushed because I've got my discipleship group beforehand, and I thought about bringing up my bottles of Bioptimizer's product, but I realized what I have in the truck right now are the Mass Seams product and the P3OM product. The Mass Seams helps you put on more amino acids in your body, or 1,200% more amino acids. P3OM is an advanced probiotic, helps you digest foods more efficiently. So we've been talking about another product that I do not have in the truck right now. I keep this at home. I do have it in the truck during the weekdays, but I ran out, and it's called Magnesium Breakthrough. So the reason I keep that product in the truck during weekdays is on a late night, like tonight will be a very late night. We've got our life group meeting tonight, so I get home extraordinarily late. I like to take a couple of those tablets on the way home because they're not sleeping pills, but they help me relax and get ready for sleep. There is a thing that happens during the holidays where I think you might want to get some of these and keep them in your car. Again, it doesn't put you to sleep. It helps you relax. And in my case, relax into sleep. Magnesium Breakthrough is a way to manage stress during the holidays, along with exercise and prayer and trying to level set your mind that let's not seek the approval of man. But because it's a full-spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 forms of organic magnesium, it helps control the stress hormone cortisol. So if you get stressed out during the holidays and you know who you are, go to bioptimizers.com/Todd. Use promo code Todd to save an extra 10% on Magnesium Breakthrough. That's bioptimizers.com/Todd, promo code Todd. So the judge has effectively come out and said, there may not be a gag order, but I'm going to be watching you. And maybe I'll just put you in prison for just a little while because you've said some mean things. His wife decided to approach this. Her name is, her name is his wife. And if I could ever get my computer to cooperate with me, Ethan Haine. She wrote this: my husband, Ethan Haine's First Amendment rights may be under attack by a de facto gag order, but mine are not. On December 3rd, the judge threatened Ethan with federal prison and his attorneys with sanctions if they continue to post so-called inflammatory content on X-Twitter about the DOJ's corruption in this case. He didn't grant or deny the gag order, but kept the government's motion live, pending trial in February. This is arguably worse and serves 2 purposes. The court's instructions were to avoid similar conduct, leaves unclear what kind of speech represents a violation, presumably that which the DOJ doesn't like, see below, and what the consequences would be, impositions of a gag order merely being one of them. By leaving the matter undecided, the court is shielded from public criticism and appellate review, where it would likely be overturned as unconstitutional in the Fifth Circuit. As a result of this non-gag order, the onus is on the defense to muzzle themselves. It's an unconstitutional prior restraint of someone who needs free speech the most, the criminal defendant David facing a corrupt government, Goliath. I was not planning on speaking publicly about this case. I'm a private person, and I don't really use social media, but Ethan's ex-posts have been the only way he's been able to raise funds for a legal defense and expose the DOJ's blatant corruption over the last year and a half. As a wife and attorney, I can't sit by while they extinguish the light he's shown on this case, particularly as newly unsealed evidence proves this case was malicious all along. More on that later. This from the judge. If similar conduct continues to arise in this case after this hearing, I will not hesitate to reconsider the issuing of a gag order. Such an order, should such an order become necessary, any violation by an attorney may result in sanctions and/or formal written order of sanctions from this court. Furthermore, any violation of this order by the defendant himself could lead to the revocation of his bond and immediate custody, sending to the federal jailhouse, the federal detention center. Just pause for a second. If you say mean things on Twitter, we're going to put you in a federal prison. This judge is not a judge. This judge is a tyrant, period. As background, she continues, Ethan is the whistleblower who exposed in a report with Real Chris Rufo that Texas Children's Hospital was lying to the public about the existence of its so-called transgender program for children. They were implanting puberty blockers on kids as young as 11 and hiding it from the public. He's currently facing 4 felony charges on made-up, baseless HIPAA theory. The DOJ's case is falling apart for both legal and non-legal reasons. Everyone should read this excellent article from Tom Bartlett's at the Free Press. It is a good article. Those reporting really captures what this case is about and what it's been like to live with. Since January 2024, Ethan has been vocal on X about the corruption we've experienced since the government first showed up at our home in 2023. Remember this. As I recall, they rolled heavy to his house. You know, armed agents and such, because he might pop out of that house and start performing surgery on them because he's a very, very dangerous surgeon. Most recently, she writes, he's been posting about the prosecutor's failures using screenshots of public motions and transcripts, including a motion to dismiss hearing where they really embarrassed themselves. He posted about serious financial and personal conflicts held by the former lead prosecutor, Tina Ansari. His lawyers at Burke Law Group have been vigorously defending his First Amendment rights. In their opposition to the gag order, they called it the culmination of an abusive and incompetent prosecution and a bad faith attempt to shield the prosecutors from mounting criticism. And not the B, represented by P&J Ban, or Panajam, is also a law firm, also sought to intervene in this case, recognizing the serious First Amendment issues at stake, but the judge denied their motions. So what this is really all about is that the government cannot have people questioning their power, their orthodoxy of the so-called transgender treatments, again, so-called treatments. Ethan Haine didn't share the names of any patients. He didn't share the names of any families. At no time did Rufo have access to this. They simply proved that Texas Children's Hospital, like every other, it seems, children's hospital in this country, is completely bought and paid for. In tomorrow's Substack, which you can get at the Todd Herman Show, that's substack.com, I'm going to explain why you and I need to remember something. In the American medical system, the American pharmacy system, pharmaceutical system, the American surgical system, we are not patients. We are products. They're getting in the way of productizing teen depression and teen anxiety. Ethan Haine is getting in the way of a massive vertical they're building of kids who become adults and are 100% reliant on pharma for the rest of their lives to maintain the illusion of a fake identity. They're also adults, a massive vertical who've been convinced that pharma is how they become their unique selves. It's how they live their true lives. We must understand something and be wide-eyed. We must be clear-headed. I'm a big fan of what Elon Musk is doing with cutting government spending and abuse. I'm a big fan of the Department of Government Efficiency. But let's please be wide-eyed about something. Please understand. Elon Musk says he lost his son to what he calls the trans cult. That's a phrase I endorse. And he also wants computer chips in your brain. He started by installing computer chips in the brains of people who need them to be able to move, to overcome paralysis. That can be miraculous. Watch as that metastasizes. Watch as an entire vertical created by pharma and academia and the Mockingbird media, an entire vertical of people whose illusion of self is made possible through pharma, are offered the opportunity to be further augmented with computer chips in their brains. They could just instantly have access to languages, math, knowledge. You no longer need to go to your phone to ask a question. How do I convert pints to pounds? Be wide-eyed. The enemy is going to use any means necessary to get into our bodies. You know why, right? He needs to separate us from God in any means he can. In the minds of young men is a mental virus. It is a spiritual virus. It puts into their minds beliefs and pleasure pathways in regard to sexual activity that stands adverse to God. And it is addictive. If every, night, morning, day, you use, you know what I mean by using it, you are giving yourself endorphin hits. When those endorphin hits are suddenly gone, that's pretty traumatic. And all you need to go back to the endorphins is to go back to the source that separates you from God. So does this fake image. I wasn't made in God's image. I was made in the image of myself. I'm all powerful. And a computer chip in your brain, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We're to put the word of God on our minds, on our foreheads, to teach it to our kids, to live it on a daily basis. When there's a computer chip in your brain made by God, the people who make these computer chips, do you really think they won't try to insert their personalities into it? Think of the money. After all, we are products, not patients in this corrupt medical system. And the money's intense. It is. If you look at the money that we spend on healthcare and how the performance has gone down, I think that is only maybe second place to the world's greatest economy with the biggest engine of commerce and innovation, being a nation that is a debtor nation. We are absolutely structurally bankrupt. We are officially 30 trillion in debt. It's more like 330 trillion. And people get this. We see the interest rates going up. One of the reasons a lot of people voted for President Trump was he's going to right-size the economy, and he'll do what he can. Part of that is the Department of Government Efficiency. And I just talked about the downside of Elon Musk. There's an upside. Part of it is President Trump's true understanding of what business needs. They need to be able to come home and invest in producing products here. Right now, because of what Biden's done again, he's been caused to do, that doesn't work. I think President Trump will change that on day one. It's unfortunate that he has a labor secretary nominee who hates small businesses and hates the work or the freedom of workers. So that's got a little bit murky. But it's going to be a wild ride. So if you're in a buy and hold position with your retirement, how do you take that wild ride? I guess you stand back and watch others. And you hope that buy and hold works. Except buy and hold, in my judgment, has become a fool's errand. My friend Zach Abraham at Bulwark Capital Management actively manages every single portfolio, which can reduce risk and volatility. So what's his goal? Well, obviously, to have you have a successful retirement, which Zach defines as knowing exactly how much money you'll have every month for the rest of your life. That's how he defines it. He does that through a maniacal focus on risk management, which again goes back to actively managing every portfolio because he believes, as do I, that can reduce risk and volatility. So do this. Just get in touch with him and ask for a free consultation. Start the new year by understanding where you're at in retirement. Are you on track? Simple. He'll look at your work, your portfolios for free. Just go to knowyourriskradio.com. That's KNOW, knowyourriskradio.com, or call him at 866-779-RISK. That's 866-779-RISK. Investment advisory services offered through Trek Financial LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Investments involve risk and are not guaranteed. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Trek 24-378. The enemy does need to get into our bodies. He hates our bodies because he doesn't have one. He hates our bodies because God said we were made in his image, which brings us around to a spiritual culture shift. The New York Post has written about a study on Orthodox Christian churches. Here's kind of an example of what Orthodox means. Much more choir music, sometimes even chanting, instead of worship bands with popular Christian music. It means less of a focus on the personality of pastors. In fact, no focus on the personality of pastors. Pastors are really doing homilies, reading straight from the Bible with a little bit of an observation maybe about common life, but far less focus on what we would say at my church is real life. Talking about the news of the day to some degree and how we all face the news of the day. And it is far more than traditional. The services are an established length. They're an established time frame. They have an established survey of communion. It's all very, very predictable. Some people would say it's boring. This is from the New York Post. A survey of Orthodox churches around the country found that parishes saw a 70% increase in converts in 2022 compared with the pre-so-called pandemic levels of 2019. And while historically men and women converted in equal numbers, vastly more men have joined the church since 2020. Father Josiah Tenham, and you'll hear from him in a second, has led St. Andrew's Orthodox Church in Riverside, California for nearly 3 decades, and he's noticed a swift jump in interest. The last 4 to 5 years have been a massive uptick. It's showing no sign of tapering off. If anything, it's increasing still. It's happening massively in untold numbers all over the country. Trenham's church has 1,000 active participants, and although recent converts in his congregation have been split roughly evenly between men and women, he agrees that most Orthodox churches around the country are gaining far more men. The feminization of non-Orthodox forms of Christianity in America has been in high gear for decades, Trenham explained. That's his opinion. Feminization. Interesting. He points to the fact that the vast majority of attendees at most Christian churches are female. Many services are accordingly dominated by emotional songs, swaying, uplifted hands, eyes closed in ecstasy. Men are much less comfortable in those settings, and they've voted with their feet, which is why they're minorities in these forms of worship, he said. Our worship forms are very traditional and very masculine. Now, incidentally, when you get a look at this pastor, you might understand something of a view of his masculine view of masculinity. But is that really why? Here's a saying that's worth considering. What good is the church if it's like the world? Why go to church? Our friend Gianna Jensen, famous for having survived an abortion, a great Christian woman with great opinions on all things, Gianna Jensen creates some coffee mugs. One of them says, "How can you change a world you resemble?" So if you walk into a church and it's just like the world, why walk in? The closer it looks to a mall, why not just go to the mall? Malls are more fun. You can go whenever you want, plus there's ice cream. In the case of an Orthodox church, they don't look a thing like the world. They look very different. There's also this. They're the same theologically. Now, you would take, for instance, some evangelical churches, and I can only speak from the experience of mine versus our Lutheran church. The Lutheran church in Seattle, we were members of for years, was in fact biblically strict for a while. And then the cracks began to appear. We had one pastor who couldn't stop having every single sermon be about the environment. And at first it was recycling, and then it was a carbon tax, and then it was global warming, and then it was a UN approach to capping carbon output. And very soon, I started to really track his sermons. They went from 90% the word, 10% observation, to 90% environmentalism with a little bit of Jesus sprinkled on top. We had another pastor who lost his faith. He stepped away and went back to being a college professor, and he's a good one. He's a dear man. We were victimized then by a pastor sent in with half his salary paid. I knew what was up. My wife knew what was up. It's a Soros plant. We did everything we could to try to stop this, but church went the other way. They brought this guy in, and half or at least 3/4 of his salary was paid by a leftist group. His sermons were mostly about South Park. Well, I'm not kidding. He quoted a show that mocks the Lord Jesus in nearly every one of his sermons. And then the questions began. Why aren't we bringing people in to perform same-sex unions? Where in the Bible did Jesus ever talk about gay? Jesus addressed marriage, adultery, fornication, and he chose 12 men, 11 of whom became apostles. And then, of course, Luke and Saul, who became Paul, came along, and they taught. They taught about marriage, what it means, human sexuality, and how not to practice it. Jesus also said, I did not come to tear down the law, but to fulfill it. And yes, there were some specific instances where Jesus changed things, which he gets to do because he's God, because they've been fulfilled through the law, dietary restrictions, etc. Jesus changed those because they'd been fulfilled, and he was about to fulfill the entire law. So our church changed with the times. Orthodox Christian churches are not changing with the times. They're not even having worship bands or coffee in the lobbies. Is it masculinity? Or is it something else that's drawing men there? Incidentally, evangelical churches, at least ours, has always had more women than men. And part of that has to do with women living longer than men. That's a number that's not disclosed in this. Many of the single women who attend evangelical churches are single, not through choice, but through the death of their husbands. Women are living a lot longer than men, and that number continues to expand. But there's something else, and I'm sure you've already connected the dots on this. This isn't in the New York Post piece, but it should be. It's the lack of wisdom of these leftist churches, because, of course, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. They don't fear the Lord. They apparently hate the Lord. And the Lord has provided for us not just wisdom, but ways, in fact, to use his wisdom to help with our bodily health. I'm holding a bottle of a product called Wisdom. It's a biblical herbal blend. And the idea for this came into the mind of a doctor named Patrick Gentempo. And he was in the Holy Land walking where Jesus walked, simply experiencing the tour. But as he walked and he read through the mind of a doctor, he couldn't help but think of all the times sacred herbs are mentioned in the Bible. Sometimes for prayer, sometimes for other forms of ceremony, sometimes for healing. And as he was in the Holy Land walking about, he received some inspiration to create this product called Wisdom. So it is an oil-based herbal blend. And here's what I get from it. First of all, a healthy response to inflammation. If you harness inflammation, even after intense forms of exercise, if you harness it, it can be your friend. An improved immune response, relaxation, joint health, all of this from this product. He went to some extraordinary lengths to maintain the potency of this, which you will taste. And so this is an enormously good tasting product. I take it straight. I've done this on the show. My daughter puts it in her coffee. She gets all the benefits from coffee, the lift, but not the jagged edge. I need the jagged edge. I love the jagged edge. Bring me the jagged edge. And when I take it straight, I'm always impressed by how good it tastes. One of the reasons why is because it is cold brewed. It is made in incredibly small batches. It's infused with light waves and sound waves to lock in the potency. So get what I get. Biblical wisdom in an herbal blend. Go to trywisdomnow.com/Todd. That's trywisdomnow.com/Todd. You can stock up for wisdom on an incredible 33% off plus free shipping. Each order comes with a 180-day money-back guarantee. That's trywisdomnow.com/Todd. trywisdomnow.com/Todd. Is it really feminization of these churches that's driving men towards the Orthodox churches? I don't think so. I think it's predictability. We all have in our hearts a need to be led by God. I would suggest that men who are called to be the spiritual leaders of their homes need a solid leader. Solid leaders don't change with the times. Yes, we can adapt on a battlefield basis, but the Bible doesn't give us the opportunity to adapt because the ultimate leader and the only true leader is Jesus, and he's not changing. He can't and won't because his word is inerrant. It's complete and inerrant, and it is useful for teaching and rebuke at all times. The further you move away from it, the further it's going to drive in the men's hearts that I don't feel like this is a leadership place. But then there's this. Liberal-leaning churches are absolutely plummeting in terms of the number of attendees. And the more aligned they are to so-called progressive views, the more distinct this drop is. If you look at the key Anglican churches of Canada, now the Anglican churches of Canada are far more liberal. The Anglican Church in North America and the United States is a little bit conservative. They're far more liberal in Canada. Look at this. 2019 total number on parish rolls, 333,894. 2022, 294,931, a 12% decline. 26% decline in average Sunday attendance. Regular identifiable givers, a 17% decline. Easter attendance, 45% decline. Pentecost attendance, 37% decline. 47% decline in Christmas attendance. 25% decline in baptisms. Confirmations, 13% decline. 10% decline in marriages. Funerals, 0% decline. Anglican churches of Canada introduced a pastoral blessing for men who think they're women and parishioners who don't believe they are any biological sex whatsoever. If your church looks like the world, what is the need for your church? When you're walking through a mall, you expect to see signs of the world. You expect to see pride flags, so-called trans flags. You expect to see coffee shops and yik-yakking. And we have a coffee shop in our church. We have a lobby. There's a reason for that. Number one, it gives people an opportunity to sit and have fellowship. Number two, our church is opened about 12 hours a day because there's always something going on. We always want the church building to be in use. We never want the real estate to go cold. Why do that? Why steward God's money in such an inappropriate way? But there's some things that are not going to change in our church. There's not going to be a pride flag. There's not going to be a so-called trans flag. And as much as our pastors take heat for this, there's very little discussion of political personalities. Our point of view in the church is if we're in the Bible, you don't need us to tell you how to vote. If we're speaking biblical truth, you already know how to vote. On the topic of things like so-called transgenderism, if you consult Genesis and go throughout the Bible on male-female relationships, you understand that is not biblical. Same thing with marriage, same thing with thieving, same thing with coveting. If you apply coveting to things like reparations, you already have your answer. Reparations are driven from hatred. We're not to hate our neighbor, but to love them. Reparations are a form of refusing to forgive. They're a form of coveting. If you're in the Bible, you know that we're to forgive our enemies. We're to love our enemies. We're to pray for them. We're not to covet neither their neighbors' wives or their houses or their cars or their 401ks. We're to forgive. Our point of view on this is the opposite of these heretical churches. And in Christian Orthodox churches, most of them are not out speaking about politics. They're going straight from the Word of God. And sometimes, even fire and brimstone. Sometimes they talk about hell and the reality of the choice you face. I'm always fascinated, literally fascinated, by obsessions people have about the longevity of life. And I guess I'm at this age, I'm 57, where a lot of my friends are saying things like, I'll ask, hey, tell me about your day. Well, I'm still above ground. That's a good thing. Why? Why? Well, I guess it beats the alternative. Why? Well, I mean, I'm living, I'm ambulatory. Cool. Why is that better than eternity with God? Well, I guess I'm just not ready for that yet. Okay, fair enough. I am. Little different. My point is this. People who fret about every last day. I have this goal. I want to live to be 101 years old. I want to be 115. I want to see my great-great-grandkids. Cool. What is that compared to 100 trillion years? Your 100-year lifespan compared to 100 trillion years. What is it? It's like spitting out of your mouth the word trillion. compared to repeating the word trillion for the next 100 trillion seconds. So focus on your longevity if that's where you're at. Focus on holding on to this life and scrapping for every last second. And maybe you should. After all, it's God's choice when it's time for us to go. But if you're not maniacally focused on your future, you think that 90 or 80 or even 115 years is going to matter when you failed to plan for your eternity? There's a number of pastors who are with these churches that are Orthodox Christian, and they become kind of YouTube celebrities. And this is one of the reasons that young men are reaching out to them. I'm going to show you some of their work here in a second. Nearing Christmas, there's something that I have not yet really put a lot of focus on sharing with you about bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. At bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd, have you checked out Tim's merch? Am I wearing one today? No, usually I'm very often wearing a Bone Frog shirt. And I've talked to Tim about where he got his merchandise, and he'll never share with me the source. It's a secret source. But there's mugs, there's T-shirts, there's hats, and all of them are very, very high end. He has a special on these things right now at bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. That's bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. 10% off across the board on all the merch. And while you're there, make sure that you don't have friends out there drinking that black blank coffee company coffee. Please don't let them do that to themselves. Because the black blank said, we're the Second Amendment coffee company. No, you're not. Kyle Rittenhouse needed to take advantage of his Second Amendment rights, and you guys ran away like cowards, which is weird because you're not cowards. You served our country with great, great valor. Oh, I know. Oh, pardon me. It's the hedge fund that bought you guys. They're the cowards. Go to bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. Check out the merchandise there, and you tell me if it's not some of the coolest merch you've seen. bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. So some of these pastors, one of them was mentioned in the article in the New York Post and quoted in his opinion of the church becoming more and more, well, feminine. We'll get to him. Let's start first of all with a guy named Father Moses McPherson, Holy Mother of God Orthodox Church in Georgetown, Texas. And by the way, Father Moses, if you're on the video service watching this, he is as yoked as he looks. The dude is probably around a 400-pound, maybe 450-pound bench presser, and very Orthodox.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. When I was in my mid-20s, I had a mentor who posed a question to me at the time that set me on a trajectory of looking at life circumstances in a different light. And if you ask yourself this question, I believe that many times you're going to know what the right answer is. And he would ask me, after I told him some dilemma that I had run into, some problem that I was facing, he would say, do you want to do what 99% of Christians would do? Or do you want to do what 1% would do? Essentially what he was saying was, what do you think the saints would do in this situation? What goes against every inclination that you have? What grinds against your self-love and absolutely puts you to death? What decision is going to be the hardest to make? And so it was, as I went through circumstances and I would talk with him, he would repeat this question again and again. And every time I knew the answer. And not only that, but just the question itself would kind of hype me up to accept the answer, because I would immediately feel that kind of, that competitiveness, that inclination of like, I don't want to be like everybody else. I want to push myself farther. I want to brace what's more difficult. I want to feel the sting of actually having to live out my faith in a way that is not going to be comfortable. And so today's video is all about that. What does the 99% of people do just in general in our culture? These are all your pop culture icons, your movie stars, your Andrew Tates, your manosphere, all these people who are looking for a certain set of circumstances and status and success as they present it to everyone, versus what is the 1% path, the path of the saints, those who emulate Christ.
And he's presenting in front of a whiteboard, looking at the temporal versus the eternal. In other words, permanence. In other words, predictability. In other words, solidity. In other words, building your house upon the rock of the Word of God. Compare that to these churches that have to just go out with the current thing. How many leftist churches suddenly identified Ukraine as the most important country in the world? The country where Jesus was born, in fact. This is far more, to me, a driver of these trends of young men adopting Orthodox Christianity than is the idea that evangelical churches or Lutheran churches have become feminized. They've not necessarily become feminized. It's just become like the world. There's no reason to be there. There's no predictability. Strong men need strong messages. This next gentleman was quoted in the New York Post article. He's the guy who said that the churches have become feminized. His name is Father Josiah Trenum, and he leads St. Andrew's Orthodox Church in Riverside, California. He's done that for quite a while. He also has a YouTube channel that gets a lot of hits. He was talking about Instagram and young girls and what's happened to them, and it's a video called Ugly Girls, ?
It's had a tremendous impact, and most of it has been horrifically negative. Let me read you just a few of the major areas that are deeply troubling. A focus on dissatisfaction with bodily image, what's sometimes called appearance anxiety, has spiked amongst women. The altered kind of best presentation, digital presentation that women make has raised a perfection bar that has led to self-condemnation in so many women's lives, dissatisfaction. It has produced a spike in eating disorders, depression and anxiety, tendencies and thoughts, ideation, self-comparison, an intense fixation on comparison, an internalized, rather perverse concept of the ideal being exceedingly thin, and has promoted a radical increase in cosmetic surgery, altering in order to physically altering through surgery one's presentation. This is not news to anybody who's been watching and thinking about these matters for some time. In the male sphere, of course, this also leads to many, many temptations for men to objectify women worse than we already do, and to develop standards and expectations that are completely fantasy and unreal, and to miss authentic life and the real glory of male-female relationships, especially the significance from God of developing a love interest and cultivating a partner that you can marry and build a life with before the face of God.
There are very few fathers, dads, who are having that form of conversation with kids these days, as is evidenced by the use of social media. So one other factor driving this is a lot of young men who had either absent fathers or part-time fathers or fathers who do not know how to lead in the godly sense. You're looking at one of them. I was a young father. I didn't know how to lead in the godly sense. And it cost my daughter a great deal. It cost our family a great deal. So men need fathers. They need the solid rock of Christ. In all of us, there's a need for God's leadership. And I believe that God is the reason this is happening. I believe that God has communicated to young men, that's not my face. Look over here. I don't think it needs to be in an Orthodox Christian church, but I think that trend is far more explainable as an act of God than the feminization of the churches. This is the Todd Herman Show. Please go be well, be strong, be kind, and do everything you can to follow Christ, which, by the way, includes being a member of a church community. He did, in fact, invent the churches.